Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 52. I have Jeff Charles. He is a podcaster, political commentator, libertarian who also lives here in Austin, Texas with me. And we're going to talk about the recent conviction of Daniel Perry and the unfortunate shooting of Garrett Foster 3 years ago. How are you, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Glad to be here. How are you?
Yeah. First of all, Jeff, let's start out. How did you get into libertarianism?
Ooh, good question. Um, my political journey is kind of interesting. I got into politics shortly after 9/11. That's when I really started paying attention. I was more on the Democrat side, just more by default, because I didn't know anything about ideology or conservative, liberal, progressive, libertarian, what have you. But then I ended up realizing that at least my personal values aligned more with conservatism. But even as I started to grow, and especially when I started doing political commentary and journalism in 2017, I was learning a lot more about libertarianism. And I realized that my beliefs actually aligned more with libertarianism than with conservatism. So it was kind of a process. I can't really say that there was any one moment when I realized it. It was just when I kind of started coming to the conclusion that a lot of the issues that Americans deal with, I don't believe that the government is the solution to them, and that I do place liberty over party and over anything else. So that's kind of how my journey progressed. And even when I was more libertarian, I was using my platform more towards a Republican conservative audience, because my thing was, we need to get the Republican Party, take that over and make it actually live up to what it says. But I kind of gave up on that last year. So it's been quite a ride.
Yeah, it's interesting too. People are disillusioned with the parties. Not to go off on tangent, but it's interesting too. Apparently, Peter Thiel is now leaving the Red Gang. But but recently we had this conviction of Daniel Perry in the shooting of Garrett Foster. Now, if we remember, this happened back in July in downtown Austin. Garrett Foster was out protesting with many other people on the streets of Austin. And on July 25th, he was shot by, as the court has now as ruled, shot by Daniel Perry during a protest. This was on July 25th, 2020. My memory's right, it was a Saturday night that this happened, and there were a lot of protests going on. So, and these protests have been going on in downtown Austin really ever since the death of George Floyd, up in Minnesota, which was in late May. So they were going on almost every night. So, what's your take on this so far, the Perry conviction?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the right move. I mean, I think he did deserve to be convicted for that crime. I remember when I first heard about it, because I had been covering a lot of these marches and a lot of these protests. And it's interesting how I've seen the whole thing framed, especially after the verdict came down. But when I watch the video, when I look at all of the reports, all the evidence, including the text message exchange that he had with friends a couple weeks before, it makes sense to me. I mean, when you look at those text messages and the way this whole situation played out, it's hard for me to believe that this was purely self-defense. And I'm sure we'll get more into this, but I mean, if you look at the positioning of Garrett's rifle, how he had it held, what happened when the car went into the crowd, all of these things, when I watched that, and then I realized that he was essentially planning on putting himself in this type of position so he can claim self-defense, it's very difficult for me to believe that this was actually a case of self-defense. The problem is that most people, just like with other news stories, they're looking at this through the lens of politics rather than through the facts and through a lens of justice.
Yeah, I watched a lot of videos, and it doesn't, none of them, they're all rather hard to see, because first of all, I didn't, you got people's backs turned, you can't really see into Perry's car, but it really does look like Foster never had he did have a gun, but he never really had it in any kind of threatening. He never really did anything threatening with it. He had a gun, yes, but it doesn't look like he ever pointed it at somebody or made any threats, and it looks like to me he was also trying to calm the situation down a little bit. Although, yeah, it's and I don't know, and I don't know if necessarily if Daniel Perry said I'm going to go get this guy, but it seemed like there was it almost seems like he was looking for something to do here, which is rather unfortunate. But yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how it seems to me too. I mean, and just to be clear for the audience, Garrett Foster was open carrying, I believe it was an AK-47. Now, this is Texas, so this is actually normal. Like I said, I went to a lot of these protests to cover them, to film them, write about them. And at most of these, you had people open carrying rifles on both sides. People who were protesting police brutality, people who were protesting the protesters, protesting BLM. They all had rifles. Not all, but I mean, many people did. They carried rifles. And except for that situation, you didn't have people shooting at each other. They were exercising their Second Amendment rights. It was very interesting for me to see conservatives complaining that Garrett Foster was open carrying in a state where that's legal and where it should be legal. Yeah. He has the right to defend himself or to even brandish a firearm like he was. But the gun never came up. He had it in a ready position because one hand was on a banner that he was carrying with somebody else on the other hand carrying it, and his other hand was on his rifle holding it because it was attached to him, probably to make sure that it didn't flop around and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what was happening, and he never raised it. And as a matter of fact, Daniel Perry basically admitted that he didn't raise the gun. He was saying, I wanted to prevent him from raising the gun, but there was no indication that he was going to do that. So to me, it was just kind of weird, the narratives that people came up with, calling him an Antifa thug or a Black Lives Matter person or whatever. Then it came out later that he was actually a libertarian, but I think most people still don't know that. So I think that a lot of this, people's opinions are being formed based on politics. If the perceived political affiliations were reversed, and this was a MAGA person, and he was marching in the street for whatever reason, and he had a rifle, and a BLM person shot him in the same situation, I think their story would be different.
The most troubling aspect about all of this is that people seem to think facts depend on who is saying the facts or who's involved with the facts. That's and well, if you, and that's, yeah, I don't know where we go from here. If two people watch the same video and come to different conclusions, well, how did you come to different conclusions? Yeah. There was a lot of rude posting on his Facebook page, and I think that's why they eventually shut it down. But he did have a Facebook page, and he actually was coming out in favor of Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen on that page. Although I don't ever, although he was in Austin, I don't ever remember seeing him at any of our libertarian events or any of his. If he was there, maybe I just didn't say hi to him. But he obviously was active in some areas. In fact, according to Zach Foster, who I don't believe is any relation, he was involved with the that group we call B. I don't know if we can say their name on here, but that bird dogs or Bitabo or Beady Boom Boom group. That those boys. Apparently, he was more involved with those guys. He was not, but he was obviously out there protesting. I even went out to a handful of the protests myself, but they all stayed pretty much peaceful. Although I will admit, it seems, I don't know what's going to happen. Abbott said he was going to pardon, but he hasn't issued any pardon. I don't know if there's going to be any appeal. I do wonder also, what would have happened if this had been tried in Williamson County instead of Travis County or Bastrop County instead of Travis County,
Yeah,
and it's unfortunate that we're asking that question, but
Yeah, it is unfortunate because the focus should be on the
Yeah.
facts of the case. I know Abbott signaled that he wants to pardon him. Now in Texas, he can't just do that unilaterally. It has to go before the board of pardons, and they have to look at the whole thing, and then they have to recommend it, and then he can sign off on it. I'm not sure if they're going to do that because when they look at the actual facts of the case, and I'm not sure if the transcript of the trial has been released yet, but even with the information that we have, it's going to be very difficult to argue that this guy was just defending himself. And I think with cases like these, I think reasonable people can look at the facts and come to different conclusions. I think people could reasonably come to a conclusion that disagrees with mine. But my issue is that most of these people aren't doing that. I mean, it's just basing it purely on politics. Like, for instance, like if somebody tells me, oh, well, it was a Soros-backed DA who prosecuted the case, so how could you support him? Then I know, okay, you don't really care about what happened in the case. You just don't like the politics of the guy doing it. I'm not into George Soros. I don't like him or whatever. But my thing is, if there's a case, I'm just looking at the facts of the case. I'm not putting politics into it.
Yeah.
And to me, this is a bigger case because it is determining how we do our self-defense laws and things like that. I mean, but you can't, even in Texas, like his friend told him, you can't deliberately put yourself in a situation where you might have to use your gun to defend yourself and then call that self-defense. And I think that's what is what happened here.
Yeah. I mean, I can't walk into somebody's house with a gun and they shoot me and then claim, and then they pull a gun on me and then I shoot them and claim self-defense. It's like I walk, this was on a public street, and there's all, and this is another debate, another discussion. And I do have to say, I am not at all sympathetic to these protesters who feel like they're obligated to block traffic. I'm not. I absolutely positively hate that with every bone in my body. And I've protested on sidewalks. I've protested on, I've protested on the Capitol lawn, but going out and just, making people late for work.
Well, you're violating people's right to move where they want. I mean, so I don't approve of that either. I mean, there were a couple situations where I was driving home, and it was near downtown, and the protesters came out into the street. Now they passed by, so it's not like they blocked me for a long time. I mean, every other car just stopped, waited 2 minutes, they were gone, then we just kept going. But in this situation, it's funny because that's one of the defenses that people are using for Daniel, like, oh, well, they can't block traffic or whatever. Well, they were moving, and there were plenty of the other places that he could have turned. Most people just wait for the people to walk by. It might be a little annoying, but as long as they're not stopping you from getting to where you want to be, then people you generally don't care.
Yeah, I don't know what the circumstances do. It looks like from what I hear, Perry was did he do some kind of work? Was he like a Uber Eats or Uber or something like that, or he was doing deleveries? Or
he was an Uber driver. Now I'm not sure if he was working as an Uber driver at that point, if that's what he was doing. But one of the things he did, I don't know if that was his side hustle or whatever, but he was an Uber driver.
Yeah, and also some people do come to Austin just to Uber. I mean, they may not live in Austin, but they'll come from Temple or Killeen just to do, because there's more. I don't think they can do it up there, and there's enough of a demand for it, so they come down here. Would come down to Austin and get their. They go where the business is. So that
makes sense.
Yeah, so I don't. Yeah, I know that was brought up, the issue. He wasn't even in town. Well, that's part of the. But yeah, it's rather interesting. But seeing some of these messages and seeing all the things he said, it really seems like there was I'd probably be more sympathetic to a manslaughter conviction than an outright murder conviction. As I might give him that, but I definitely think there's there's definitely a lot of what seems to be a lot of negligence here, if nothing else.
Yeah, that's actually one thing that I did question, the actual charge. I was like, does this really fall under murder, or should this fall more under manslaughter? I'm not sure exactly how Texas laws work with that, because I don't think that he specifically was like, I'm going to go and kill Garrett Foster. Yeah. But it did seem like he was trying to put himself in a position to where he could kill someone and get away with it. So maybe that's why the charge got bumped up to murder and not manslaughter so much. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think the saddest part about all this, Jeff, and this isn't related to Antifa or any of these people, but we're sending these soldiers off to war, and now they're coming back, and they're, we train. It's like Daniel Perry was trained to be this way, and Jeff, and we're not reintegrating these guys back into society, and I think that's as much an issue here. I'd rather Garrett Foster be alive, and I'd rather Daniel Perry's life not be ruined, but his life is ruined effectively, and now
I think you brought up a deeper point there, and I'm glad that you did. A lot of people get back from the military, and we don't take care of these people. Not really at all. The VA is trash, and to me, it's like that kind of thing does contribute to this. Even the militarization of the police. They're taught to have a certain mindset, to see police as the good guys and people who aren't police as the bad guys. And, when you have a mentality like that, it can lead to situations like this, especially if you are mad at protesters and like, oh, they're rioting. And especially if you're watching media that's telling you that all of these protests are violent when they weren't, whether you agree with the politics or not. Most of them weren't. None of the protests I actually went to actually got violent. And so, when you combine all those elements along with others into the equation, you end up with situations like this. And I think nobody really examines the underlying factors that lead to this stuff, and we should be.
Yeah, we had one situation too where we were protesting some of the corona restrictions in front of the Capitol, and it so happened that there was a Justice for Palestine protest going on, and and yet it's kind of funny when you get two causes that are basically unrelated trying to, and nobody can reserve the Capitol lawn. So it's kind of whoever shows up there first gets it. And it's like, there's another protest here. But there was this attitude of, why can't they go back to their own country? It's like, and I said, like, just be nice, just, and, I walked up there and I just saw, here's a bunch of people who care about something and they care enough about this to be out here. And I just said, I said, they're not necessarily enemies, but they're not necessarily allies. Just be nice. And we were all pretty nice. But it is funny when you're out there protesting, though, and you have this attitude toward other protesters. It's like, well, they're here too, but we're just mad because they were taking up the space we wanted to occupy. But
yeah, well, free speech is for everyone. The freedom to assemble, freedom to redress your grievances with the government. Everybody has it.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever seen that Seinfeld clip that's been circulating a few times where Kramer goes to I think he goes to the AIDS, fighting AIDS or something like that rally. And they said, here's your ribbon. He says, oh, I don't want to wear the ribbon. He says, why don't you want to wear the ribbon? He says, yeah, but I still want to protest, but I just don't want to wear the ribbon. And everybody's like, why don't you want to wear the ribbon? And suddenly it turns into this thing where everybody gets mad at Kramer for not wearing the ribbon. It's like, okay,
That's what I've never seen that one. I didn't really watch Seinfeld.
Yeah,
so
I didn't really watch Seinfeld either. Did you know Garrett Foster, or did you know his family or anything like that?
Oh no, I didn't know him. I've talked to some people who knew him, but I didn't know him.
Yeah. What did they all have to say about Garrett?
They said he was a great guy. He believed in the causes that he believed in. He was always down for helping people out. I think he would help feed homeless and stuff like that. So, I know he loved his wife, and everything that I've heard about him has been glowing. I'm sure he wasn't perfect because nobody is, but he wasn't out to hurt anybody. That's one of the things that really bothered me by a lot of the reaction, especially from people on the right. They were making it sound like he was a rioter. Oh, Daniel Perry is in jail for killing a rioter. He wasn't rioting. None of those people were rioting. But again, in this media landscape, if you're watching just right-wing media, then you might think that all of these protests were actually riots. Some of them know that they're lying, others don't. But to me, it's like, even if you disagree with the cause, you don't have to lie about it. most of these people were just out there protesting. And you may disagree with what they were protesting against, but you guys got mad when the left made it sound like everybody who was at the Capitol on January 6th was rioting, when not everybody was rioting. Some people were, most
Yeah.
people weren't. So
I've never, I don't know, having not been there, but I'm also kind of looking at that. Isn't that public property anyway? That's the Capitol. They have every right to go into the Capitol. It's their freaking
yeah,
building. I mean, I wouldn't say they have a right to go into somebody's office.
right.
I wouldn't, and I'm not going to say that the men have the right to go into the ladies' room, the ladies have the right to go into the men's room, but or you have the right to go into somebody's car, but it's the public area. This is theirs. They pay the taxes. Of course, obviously, every single American can't go in there at once, but I see it the same way with the Capitol law. And yeah, there's certainly been hypotheses too that some cases you have agent provocateurs just going out they'll start breaking windows just to try to make the protesters look bad,
Yep.
even though they really don't believe in the cause.
They
It's
do it
really
to both
getting hard
sides
to
of the
know
spectrum. Yeah.
it's getting hard to know who the good guys is. And apparently also I hear there's some of these groups that just go out and riot. They just go out and stir the pot because they want to stir the pot no matter what it is.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
I mean
know,
that is a thing, and they do it to both sides. I mean, they do it to the left, they do it to the right.
yeah,
I mean, you had the whole Ray Epps situation. You have other stuff coming out about how there were members of the federal government out there trying to spark this stuff. But even on the left end, I mean, during a lot of these protests, the FBI. I mean, there's a whole series about it on The Intercept, and there's a whole podcast about it. But they were
yeah,
using informants not just to inform the FBI of what was going on as far as violence goes, but to actually try to convince people to commit violent acts so that they could arrest them. They did the same thing with the people who were charged with trying to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. So to me, it's like you just
yeah,
said it. I mean, it's hard to know who the enemy is. I don't think
yeah,
it's that hard. But the problem is,
yeah,
for people like you and I, it's not hard. But for people who are in this team red and team blue mindset, if you're on team red, you think team blue is the enemy. No, team blue disagrees with you politically, but they're not necessarily your enemy. Your enemy is authoritarianism, and authoritarians are both on team red and team blue, and they love the fact that you're
yeah.
fighting each other because that means you're not fighting them.
One theory also I heard that a lot of the protests that a lot of the symbolism of the protests in 2020 was similar to the protests. I mean, like they were using the same symbols as some of the protests that were going on down in Chile back in 2019.
Hmm.
So maybe, and there was this hypothesis that maybe somebody like Maduro or somebody like that was backing these people. I do suspect that some of these people are being funded in some ways, but maybe they're getting
Yeah.
their bills paid or something like that. But the question is to who. I mean, it's very easy to make accusations like this, but it's very hard to find concrete evidence as to who's doing what. And I really want to be careful that we obviously though, they could have just copied the symbols because they liked them too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but you see a lot of things out there that look the same because there's this tendency now to look for things, to look for symbols that just don't mean anything. Like we're looking for dog whistles, as they like to call them. Oh, he said that word, and if you've heard the theories too, note always look when you're doing a podcast and somebody has books in the background. Look at what books he has. Those they're sending messages with the
Oh,
books. It's like I
yeah.
don't. I'm good. I think I'm going to make sure I never have books in my background on this show. Uh,
It wouldn't matter. They'll find something. I mean, some
yeah,
people, it's okay to put on the tinfoil hat sometimes, but you
yeah,
don't want to put on a whole tinfoil suit because then
yeah,
you're still missing it.
yeah, yeah. Tinfoil suit, tinfoil. Yeah, it's so weird sometimes. Maybe it's just because these people have too much time on their hands and they go do this stuff.
Hmm.
So yeah, no signs of appeal, and yeah, yeah. So where do you think we go? Have you followed the issue of police brutality for a while?
Yeah, for quite a while.
I've always been focused on police brutality, but I don't know why it has to be racialized. That's the thing I don't get. I mean, it's like, okay, do you care if it happens to some do you really care about police brutality, or do you care about just want to look for something that may or may not be there? If you If you know about the killing of Justine Demond up in 2017 in Minnesota, she was a white Australian woman was killed by a Somali police officer, and nobody cared. But then George Floyd gets killed, and suddenly it's riots. I mean,
it's because the people who are pushing the narrative
yeah,
about police brutality don't really care about police brutality. I mean,
yeah,
this doesn't apply to all of them, but
yeah,
it's just, you know, I think it's okay to recognize that police brutality, which, by the way, police brutality, we always focus on shootings, but that's not all police brutality is. Rodney King was police brutality. He didn't die. Police mistreat people. Oh,
yeah,
oh, was that a plane? I
yeah.
heard a noise.
Yeah,
Um,
Rodney King was police brutality. Yeah,
Yeah, Rodney King. But I mean, the thing is, a lot of cases, most cases of police brutality don't involve somebody dying. Police mistreat people every single day. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that it disproportionately happens to Black Americans. But the reality is that it happens to all of us. And the thing is, it's like, you can tell who is actually serious about the issue by what they will protest, what they will speak out against. Daniel Shaver, white guy who was killed in Arizona, murdered by police, and that guy kept his job. Ryan Whittaker, same thing, a white guy murdered by police, they kept their jobs. Black Lives Matter, the local chapter, showed up for both of them and their families. They marched for them, not the global organization, but the local group. A lot of people on the right don't know that. And to me, it's
wow.
like, yeah, they did. And to me, it's like, what frustrates me about the right is that they don't really care about police brutality. But when they see it happen to a white guy, they're not saying, oh, that was unjust, we need to do something about that.
Yeah,
They see that and say, oh, well, why doesn't CNN cover that? Well, no, why don't you cover it? Why don't you do something about it? And to me, it's like, what the left uses it for a narrative, right? They want to racialize it, like you said. But to me, I'm way more terrified of state supremacy than I am of white
yeah,
supremacy. State
yeah,
supremacy makes everything else possible, really. And to
yeah.
me, it's like, you're probably familiar with Eric July, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
backwards.
he has a musical group called Backwards. And one of my favorite lyrics by him, and he's saying is talking about how they use these narratives to basically protect the state and to blind us to what the state is doing. And he says, for instance, when a cop shoots a black man, you focus on the racism, ignoring all the statism, and then basically that's the power that you gave them. And
Yeah,
to me, it's like that sums it up right there. The racial issue isn't being mentioned because it's something that they believe that it's something that should be combated. The racial issue is meant to cover up for what the state is doing, abusing its citizens,
yeah,
and to get people at each other's throats.
yeah. Well, the other thing the right wing does too is you often hear the line, "Well, he probably had it coming anyway," some of these people who were killed by police do have long rap sheets.
Sure.
Justine Demond, she didn't have anything, but yeah, but some of them do and some of them don't. But yeah, and I don't want to go into details about all the ones who might have had it coming, but some of these people were just guys minding their own business. And just happened to, maybe they got pulled over for I know a guy who actually got he actually did something really stupid. He was driving and somebody apparently was being rather aggressive on the road with him, and he actually, while he was driving, pulled his gun up. and
Mm.
and you do that while you're driving, so suddenly later it's like there were like 9 squad cars all stopping him and basically searching him, and he got off and everything. But boy, it was boy, you can imagine that was a mess.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, it still gets in the court records anyway. And he still ended up losing his job because they found out about it. Said, we can't have you doing this. It's
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it can still lead to really bad outcomes. I mean, and just, I don't know. It's like on the right, they're selective about the part of government that they want to be limited. They don't
yeah,
want police to be limited. So that's why they will
yeah,
do things like look up people's criminal records, not because it has anything to do with what happened, because 9 times out of 10, it doesn't, unless they're in the middle of one of those crimes and it has nothing to do with it. But they do it to
yeah,
dehumanize the person so that you don't
yeah.
care that the state murdered him.
Well, those police officers aren't looking up guys' criminal records while they're in the
Nope,
process.
they're not.
And I think the question too is, what do we do to get more good police work? We need to get rid of all the victimless crimes for one.
Yes.
But where do we go from there? Because I don't, when you're constantly, you don't get good behavior from anybody if you constantly focus on bad behavior. And bad behavior is the only behavior that makes the news here.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I mean, realistically, I mean, I think law enforcement should be handled by mostly by state and local communities.
Yeah.
As more of an anarchist type, I would like to see a lot of that abolished anyway. But even if you did, you'd still have to have some type of policing force. So I think what it is you focus on officers being part of the community that they police. Like you said, get rid of victimless crime so that they're only focusing on violations of rights. I actually think that would take care of a lot of it right there. I mean, because realistically,
Yeah.
I mean, like for instance, if you're driving and you don't have the right sticker on your car, the government will use the threat of violence to make you pay up and make you
Yeah.
register your car. If police didn't have to focus on that and they only had to focus on people committing violent crimes, theft, fraud, things like that, I think that right there, you would have a much better outcome. Because if you think about it, a lot of these police brutality incidents, it has nothing to do with them stopping a violent crime. Eric Garner was choked to death in New York because he was selling loose cigarettes on a street corner. Philando Castile was pulled over for, I can't remember what the violation was, but it was some minor infringement or whatever. This happens all the time. And if these laws don't allow these officers to approach people for silly crap, then you would get rid of a lot of it there, just because there just wouldn't be the opportunity for it to happen.
Selling loose cigarettes, so just like selling single cigarettes to people on the street.
Yep.
I can imagine that. I can imagine that might be lucrative, and because I knew a guy in high school who used to do that.
Really?
You always had this big jacket on, and it's like, why are you always wearing that jacket? He says I have all these pockets. I'm always selling stuff. Whether it be cigarettes and just he'd sell cigarettes or yeah. Yeah, obviously you selling cigarettes without a license. Yeah, and probably, and considering you're selling. Yeah,
Yeah. Why should you even need a license to do that? I mean, it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't.
It definitely changes, the whole perspective, and I do wonder too, though, sometimes when you hear these people scream, "Oh, you're violating my First Amendment rights." Well, were you standing on this? I stood outside the APD once protesting, so I know they don't just. Or were you, because sometimes I hear, "Oh, you're violating our right to protest." No, you're blocking traffic, things like
Right.
that. And that's what bothers me too, is when you're claiming your rights are being violated when you're actually doing other things that are a little more, that really are more than just protesting. And unfortunately, I haven't really seen that much from protests on the right. It's almost exclusively on the left, the blocking traffic and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen actually one of the videos I told you about does show MAGA people marching in the streets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, I'm sure that they weren't just sitting there blocking traffic. Now, on the left, people will do that. But even in most of those cases, most of them are marches. So if they're just passing through and they're not preventing me from getting to where I need to go, then I don't have a problem with it. But they do not have the right to infringe on my right to move freely in the community that I live in. And in a lot of cases, I mean, especially with Austin, you can set that up beforehand and say, we want to do a march. And they set up, police will block off the roads for you. And then you can have whatever your protest march is. I've been to a bunch of them. So there really is no reason to go on the 35 and try to block traffic there. One, that's stupid. I mean, you might get hit by a car and nobody's going to care because you were stupid. And two, you're preventing people from getting to where they need to go. It's absolutely ridiculous. I saw in one case in some other state, they were blocking an ambulance from transporting a patient to the hospital. I was like, yeah, you guys are the scum of the earth. Move out of the way, let them go through, and then continue your protest.
Yeah, that was and I know I've heard other complaints from EMS and people like this about this stuff. They're not fond of these protesters at all.
Yeah,
because they've got a high stress job where they're busting your tail trying to save somebody, and then this happens. It's definitely not the best thing. I had a lady I used to work with knew somebody else, and they lost their house because the fire trucks couldn't get to them. they were able to call the police and everything, but it just kept burning, and because nobody could. There were other traffic issues, not more like related to wrecks or construction, but because the fire companies couldn't get to them, they lost a lot more than they should have.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's awful.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was. Yeah, it's definitely not a fun venture. Where do you think we go after 2020? It's just, I mean, I don't think this is going to get any better anytime soon. I mean, the craziness of 2020, I think it's really just kind of waiting, and I think as soon as there's another match to throw in, it's going to be even worse the next time.
Yeah, I'm afraid of that too. I mean, because one of the questions I get asked a lot is, do you think things are going to get better in this country? And I am both black pilled and white pilled on that. I think they will, but I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think that the authoritarianism is going to continue growing. We were already seeing it on the left, but a lot of people aren't seeing the rise of authoritarianism on the right. And I've been warning people about it. It's coming. It's already started, but it hasn't come as full-fledged as I believe it's going to. There's going to be more people who are okay with using the power of the government to attack their political opponents. We already see it with a certain person who hasn't announced his run for president yet, but he's going to. And to me, it's like, I think that with the media and politicians really fomenting these tensions, racial, political, what have you, I think we're going to see more violence. And I think that the more the government grows, the worse it's going to get for we the people. And then finally, there might be enough people who are uncomfortable enough to actually do something about it. I think right now, a lot of people are still comfortable, even with all the inflation. Democrats should have lost both the House and the Senate, not because really the Republicans would do anything better, but that's what the perception would be, right? Because of all the inflation. But it wasn't that bad for everybody. I mean, so I think a lot of people, they might be hurting a little bit, but not enough. And I think after it gets worse and people realize, well, wait a minute, both parties, every time they're in office, my life doesn't get better. And they're just passing more laws that are victimizing more people. The more this stuff gets exposed, especially on social media, on digital media, I think over time, it'll get to a point where people are willing to seek out a different option.
Who's going to run for president? You mean Trump?
No, I mean DeSantis.
I don't know what's going to happen there, because there's definitely a cult. There's such a cult surrounding Trump, and he's been deified. And it seems like if people feel like they're on a mission from God, they have to protect him. And there's some authoritarianism there in a lot of ways. I don't see anything there, But this reminds me, of the quote from Mencken, who said, "The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed, and hence clamorous to be led to safety by an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary, or most of them imaginary." Yeah, that was what Mencken said. So it seems like you're looking for villains, and you have to pass laws to be against these villains, and those are the only laws that get passed anymore either.
Yeah, I mean, you look at all these laws that are being passed right now, because what's the biggest craze? Transgender.
Yeah.
And and I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with all the laws that are being passed. I mean, I do think that pushing this on kids is wrong. But now you still got it, with, they're going after drag queens, even just doing their normal performances. Transgenders are now the enemy. You have conservatives arguing that people who have gender dysphoria shouldn't be allowed to own guns. I mean, it's just, you're right. That's another hobgoblin. And the left has their hobgoblins too. And this is exactly what Murray Rothbard talks about in an Anatomy of the State, how the intellectuals, their role is to promote the narrative that best benefits the government. And to me, these intellectuals are coming up with these hobgoblins to keep us fighting each other. I think that's all part of what we've been talking about. So I think that, I don't know how it's going to turn out, but yeah, this all of this vitriol that we're seeing between right and left, black, white, LGBTQ, and straight, this isn't what we're seeing today. It was not organic. I do not believe this happened organically. I think this was engineered. I think this was manufactured by the media, the chattering class, the elites, and I think all this stuff helps them.
Yeah, it does seem to be to help them, and it's I don't know if know the analogies. If you put the red ants and the black ants in a jar, and
Yeah.
they're getting along just fine, but then somebody shakes the jar and they suddenly start killing each other.
Hmm.
But one question I've asked though, what happens if all the red ants know that and all the black ants don't, or what? Or
Mm.
and I think there are some people out there are well aware of who's shaking the jar, but
But what do you do about it?
there's no way to tell the others that about the jar shaker.
Yeah, I that's the problem because you'll have some red ants and some black ants who understand it, but they're not the majority, so they can't do as much about it,
Yeah.
and that's by design. I mean, I have a friend Ross, and he says this all the time. Like when we're talking about racial tensions, he said, you know, black people and white rednecks have way more in common than the elites of both races. If you were to sit a white redneck down with a blue collar black man and have them have a conversation, they would realize that they have a lot more in common than they think. Same thing even with Team Red and Team Blue. I mean, there was a time period where the Tea Party was having conversations with Occupy Wall Street, and they realized, wait a minute, you hate big corporations too? Wait, you hate the government doing this? What, you're anti-government too? Well, wait a minute, maybe we should be talking. That's exactly what the elites don't want. That is their biggest fear, I guarantee it. There's a reason why both of those movements crumbled.
Yeah. Well, the Tea Party crumbled because I think it was taken over. They got hijacked almost immediately by the likes of Newt Gingrich.
Yep.
I'm not sure what to say about Occupy. You do see some. It is interesting among Bitcoiners. I mean, I see a lot. I know most of the Bitcoiners and crypto people are very much they read Rothbard. They know that they're in favor of capitalism. They're in favor of Austrian economics. But then you've got this other class who shows up and they just know what's going on doesn't work, and Bitcoin seems like it's an alternative, so they're there. And there's also this realization that it's easier to unify a group against something than it is to unify them for something.
Mm-hmm. It's true. I mean, I don't know much about the cryptocurrency community,
Yeah.
but you are right about that. And I think that's why, especially among Republicans and Democrats, I think this applies more to Republicans than Democrats, but they both do it. I mean, they're more characterized by what they're against than what they're for. But Democrats are better about this because they will say, "Here's our idea on how to improve society. Let's make the government bigger." Yada yada yada. And then Republicans say, "No, that idea sucks," and then that's it. But the problem is still there. But the Republicans are very reactionary and they're very much about, you know, we're against this, we're against this. But I don't know, it doesn't seem like that approach has a lot of longevity when it comes to having success. But it's still a lesson for us on the liberty side. I mean, yes, we are against authoritarianism, we are against government abuse. A lot of us are against the idea of government, period. But we also need to, as far as libertarians, we need to focus more on what we're for as well.
Well, yeah, true. Yeah, because sometimes I feel like the libertarian movement is just unified by hatred of the state,
Yeah.
and which I don't think is a positive thing. But the other thing too, though, and I've noticed that the big difference between the left and the right is the right asks for what they think they can get, while the left will think about what they want and they'll ask for even more of that.
Mm.
So if the right, think about negotiating for a job, and if the right thinks they can get $50,000 for the job, they'll say, "I want $50,000." If the left thinks they can get 60,000, they'll ask for 70. And if they don't get 70, they'll obviously be negotiated down. But if you start, you always have to ask for what you want or even more than what you want if you want to because if you just ask for what you think you can get, you might not even get what you think you can get.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. You might get it even lower than that. And the left
Yeah.
is really good about, if I don't get that 70,000 right now, I can still keep
Yeah.
pushing for it because now I'm making them more amenable to the idea that I want more.
Yeah.
So I mean, they'll shoot for the moon and get the stars, but eventually
Yeah.
they'll want to get the moon too. And even if they don't, they still will have accomplished a lot of what they wanted to accomplish. Whereas the other side doesn't.
Well, it's like how Vince Lombardi would say, said, we will never achieve perfection, but we will achieve excellence by constantly pursuing perfection.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. So yeah. Where do you think the libertarian movement goes from here? I mean, I think there's definitely been I don't think people on some sides realize just how much anger there was over what happened with COVID. I know for me that was certainly a case, but
Mm-hmm. I think I really like, and hopefully I don't get in trouble with your audience, but I do like the Mises Caucus's decentralized revolution strategy.
yeah,
That's actually one of the things that was instrumental in me deciding to jump ship with the Republicans and say, I want to pursue liberty this way without focusing on party, but focusing more on liberty at the local level. I like it because it's realistic. And if you read that the document that they put out, whether you're part of the Mises Caucus or not, I mean, it's hard to deny what they're saying. I mean, trying to like fooling ourselves into thinking, oh, we're going to take over the federal government in a few election cycles. That's not going to happen. It's not. The federal government, for all intents and purposes, is gone. It's a big corrupt beast. It really needs to be burned down. But before we get to that, we got to get our local communities first. And and I had already been preaching about local politics even before all of this. So their strategy is a long-term strategy. It's going to take a long time to succeed. But the thing is, when it does succeed, it will pay off a lot more than trying to get these short-term victories where we can say, oh yeah, this person won this seat or was actual, or at least able to get on the ballot. No, we need to start focusing on getting mayor seats, county judge, sheriff, city council, all of those, because when we start getting those over time, now you expand your political influence.
yeah. The starting local, I do think makes a difference. It does get you. I think that was always the focus, but if there's focusing more on that, it seems like it might be workable.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's also it's a lot like baseball. You build your farm system and then you have good players work their way up to the higher levels.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that works out. I think there's and I have to admit, I actually got more sympathetic to police in 2020 just because there were so many out there who came out and said, I refuse to enforce this COVID stuff.
Yeah.
The sheriffs and all that other stuff.
Sheriffs,
Sometimes I'll just see them. I'll just say, thank you for your hard work. I was never doing that before. I suppose it'll just take one more weird experience with a cop in a traffic stop to change my mind. But until then.
Well, but even in Illinois, I mean, they passed those assault weapons bans, and you had like 77 sheriffs say, yeah, you can pass it, but I'm not going to enforce it. Hey, you're doing your job. You are pushing back against government overreach, and you're protecting the rights of the people that live under your jurisdiction. I can't be mad at that.
Libertarians the Libertarian Party needs to have somebody running for sheriff everywhere.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think that is a key position, and they can effectively. The sheriffs have a lot of power. They can say, "Oh, you're a deputy." They can. I don't. I don't think it's like that, and I don't think it's like that in other countries. I think there's still a lot of decentralization, a lot more decentralization here. I don't know if you could do that in some European countries. I don't know if
Probably
you
not.
It's. I see. Well, what the thing's interesting too is, every time I go to Europe, I realize all the license plates are issued by the countries.
Mm.
But in Canada, in Mexico, in the U.S., the license plates aren't issued by the countries. That's just one example. But I mean, America, Mexico, and the U.S., they're all issued by the various states. Canada, they're issued by the provinces.
Right.
Of course, yeah. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that works out. So,
I think so.
Yeah. What else have you been up to lately then? So, What are you not liking in the liberty movement right now?
Um, I think that, I think that libertarians recognize this, but the liberty movement needs people who can articulate these ideas in a way that is sexier, in a way that is a more appealing,
Yes.
not so egghead. I mean, I was at this. I was at the Take Human Action tour here in Austin. We saw each other there, but you remember what Maj was saying, right? What Maj Toure
Yeah.
was saying. Like libertarians are brilliant. They are very intellectual. They are very smart, very
Yeah.
well read. But the party as a whole doesn't have a lot of people who can articulate those ideas to the public in a way that makes sense. And the liberty movement has to have that, because most people don't even know what libertarianism is. They've heard the word, but most of what they know about the Libertarian Party is based on lies, misconceptions, and ignorance. They think that, libertarians are just Republicans who like weed. I mean, we've heard that trope many different times, but a lot of that is because of the establishment media, right and left, and because Republicans and Democrats work to keep us off the ballots and all that. But it's still a weakness in the liberty movement. I think that's getting better. I mean, you have somebody like a Dave Smith. He can
Yeah.
articulate these lofty libertarian ideas and break them down in ways that make sense on the ground. You've got Larry Sharp, who actually talks policy. This is what a libertarian policy will look like for such and such problem. Spike Cohen is very good at this too. I mean, he has all the knowledge, but he can articulate it in a way that isn't condescending. That isn't like, oh, I'm just going to
Yeah.
own you in this debate. It's going to be, no, this is what we believe. This is why this is wrong, and this is what would be better. So I think that's a big weakness, but I do see some decent movement forward. Maj Toure is really good at it too. So we need more of that. We need more people who know how to talk to people, who know how to address
Yeah.
an audience, who know how to deal with regular folks, especially those who are still brainwashed into the statist mindset, because 99.9% of us used to be statist before we became what we are now. So we need to be able to reach people where they're at. We need to be able to win their hearts and minds. And we got to stop saying like, oh, because, Republicans like to say, oh, facts don't care about your feelings. Okay. But if you want to persuade, you got to go for feelings too. You got to tell those stories that get to people's souls. So I think that when that changes, I think that we'll see a lot more people joining the movement, because the ideas just make sense. They do.
Yeah, there have always been a lot of eggheads there, and we've even had some eggheads run for president. I just like, okay, you're solid, but we don't. He's too much of an egghead.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know who would. Yeah, I mean, Spike is good. Larry's good. Uh, I still see Mary. I don't think she'll run again, but Mary Ruart was always very good. I don't know how we. I think there's also this realization, especially after COVID, that there's a large portion of the population that doesn't want this stuff, and that's the scary part for me. I don't know how we go from here, but yeah, we definitely need, and I think we also need more creatives. We need more people making movies, acting in movies. Uh, that seems to have fallen off, but still the biggest, still the libertarian well, she never called herself a libertarian, but the one who's still sold the most books is Ayn Rand.
Right. Yeah, yeah, that's true. I mean, we need to leverage every tool that we can to get our ideas out there. There need to be more libertarian
Yep.
content creators. And again, content creators that can actually reach an audience. I mean, people who are good at social media. We need to step
Yeah.
up our social media game. Um, and I think that then, like I said, I think that some of the leaders are recognizing that. I mean, when I first started shifting my platform over to focusing more on libertarian ideas, I was doing Twitter Spaces with my partner Donnie, and we were we're talking about liberty, and we titled it Liberty Spaces, and we need to start it up again. But it's funny because she and I were talking, and we're like, okay, well, how can we start making more connections in the liberty movement and, get more involved in that? And we didn't even have to, because they started reaching out to us like after about 2 weeks. I mean, we had people from the Mises Caucus reaching out from the LP Texas, and we've been collaborating. And that's because they recognize that they need more allies who have big followings, or at least decent sized followings, and that are growing and that know how to articulate these ideas in a way that makes sense. So I am, which is weird for me to say, but I am a little bit more optimistic about this. I think it's going to take time, but I see that they understand where they need to go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'm glad we can find optimism in it, and especially after what's been happening in the last 3 years. Who would you like to see run in 2024?
um, I would like to see Spike, actually. I
Yeah.
like to see Spike up there, whether it's VP or president. I'd like to see Larry Sharp too. I like Dave Smith too, but I would say those three would be the main ones that I'd want to see.
I think Spike would be very good. I don't think a VP is going to be willing to run for VP again, but
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
see. I think he's probably the best chance to unify the party right now too. I don't know anybody who doesn't. I don't really know if Spike has any negatives out there, so I think that's a good shot. Do you have anything else you want to say before we go?
No, I had a lot of fun. This was great.
Yeah, it was good having you on here. Yes. So, okay. You have any places where we can find you, or
Yes, yes. You could follow me on Twitter at Jeff Charles Jr., Jeff Charles Jr. You
yes,
can check out my Substack, which is called Chasing Liberty, which is also going to be the title of my upcoming book that I'm almost done with. You can read
yes,
my stuff on my Substack, but also on redstate.com and Newsweek Opinion. And check out my podcast, which is called A Fresh Perspective.
yes? I'm glad we have somebody in Newsweek out there. That's always a good sign.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm Chris Bakery. I have a Substack, Fountainhead Forum on Substack. I also have the Fountainhead Forum channel. Please like this video or give it a thumbs up, subscribe, follow the channel on Rumble, Odyssey, and YouTube. And I also have a novel called Escape from the Village. I'm Chris Baker, and we are out. So.